Welcome to the Empowered Wife podcast, where it's all about fixing your relationship without your man's conscious effort so you feel desired and taken care of and special, even if your relationship feels completely hopeless. I'm Laura Doyle, and today I'm talking about 7 ways to become more confident. My guest, Mary, realized that she was controlling, but did not know how to stop. She wanted attention from her husband, but instead, she found herself frequently texting another guy. She knew that wasn't what she really wanted, but the pull was so strong. Today, she finds the playfulness and connection with her husband so gratifying and fun. Her vision for her marriage and her family is coming true. She's going to tell us how she did that. And then I'll be giving out the Worst Relationship Advice of the Week award, which is the logical conclusion from a preliminary study featured on a well-known medical website. Wait till you hear what the study concludes. Yikes. All of that is coming up. But first, let's talk about 7 ways to become more confident. You're not the only person who feels insecure at times, of course. Everyone does sometimes. But it's a worthy goal to want to feel more confident, to want to feel comfortable in your own skin, no matter where you are or what's going on. Second guessing what you just said or wishing you'd said something else and wanting to make yourself disappear, that gets old. It's exhausting. Having anxiety about whether you're acceptable or lovable sucks up your vitality and takes up the energy you could have been using to do something way more fun or productive. But it's hard to know how to get out of the trap of feeling like you're not good enough, that you're missing some crucial information that everyone else seems to have, or that you're just too broken or hopeless to ever feel like you can totally relax. Becoming more confident will definitely make you more attractive. Who doesn't want that, right? Fortunately, no matter how messed up you feel or your childhood was, you can become self-possessed and secure. You can start making yourself confident with these 7 practical steps. Step number 1, ask yourself how you feel. This sounds so simple, I know, but I find that many women are not well trained in this, even though emotional brilliance is one of our feminine gifts. We are geniuses at knowing how we feel and expressing it. But if no one modeled it for you, you may not be tapping into your genius. That means you're walking around without the indispensable information you need to honor yourself, which is what confident people do. Ask yourself how you feel and then answer with a feeling word like afraid, sad, hurt, angry, grateful, happy. It could also be a physical feeling like tired or hungry or relaxed. Once you inform yourself about how you're feeling, it'll be a whole lot easier to take care of yourself, which will make you feel more secure. Step number 2, ask yourself what you want. Most women are not trained in this at all, which is tragic because this is the seat of feminine power, desire. Confident people honor themselves, and knowing what you want and being able to say it directly is a critical part of confidence. It doesn't mean you'll always get what you want, but it's definitely a great start. Everyone wants things, and not knowing what they are or pretending you don't or ignoring what you want is equivalent to living in low self-esteem land. To move to the other side of the tracks, just think about what you want. Make a list. Update it periodically as your desires change. I like to spend time on mine almost every day. Number 3, spend time on frivolous fun every day. Confidence comes when you're willing to put other people off, including kids and husbands, to take care of yourself first. Having frivolous fun is part of caring for yourself, especially for a woman. Denying yourself fun may seem virtuous, but it's actually eating away at your confidence by forcing you to cope with life without regular refueling and relaxing. Start by carving out time for sitting on a porch with your book and lemonade, or shopping, or taking care of yourself by going to a cafe or for a bike ride. As long as the activity brings you joy, it doesn't have to do anybody else any good. This is what confident people do. They enjoy themselves. Feeling good also contributes to you feeling more relaxed and self assured. Step number 4, consider your limits. Whenever someone wants me to do something that is going to cause me to become overwhelmed, exhausted, stressed out, or resentful, I politely decline. Here are the magic words I use to decline such invitations. You ready? I can't. That's it. I can't. I don't explain that I will resent the person if I don't say no. I just use those two magical words. They keep me out of loads of trouble, like the time my BFF wanted to talk after I had talked all day for work. I can't was all I said. And that didn't make her love me any less, even though she really wanted to talk to me. It made her look forward to talking to me more, she told me. I was looking forward to talking to her too, just as soon as I felt up to it. Step number 5, take in compliments as the truth. When someone says you look beautiful, or you have an amazing voice, or you're so funny or so smart, consider believing them without reservation. Why not? If they think it and they're saying it to you, how does it serve you to dismiss, contradict, or undermine that positive point of view? To become more confident, simply smile and say, thank you. You could even pause to take it in, even if it feels like a lie, and even if the conversation comes to an awkward halt when you do. What's the worst that could happen? You might feel more beautiful or talented or bright. Those are all confidence inducing feelings. Step number 6, fill your own tank. I used to ignore the first 5 steps above and then get anxious, depleted, and cranky a lot. It felt awful, and I was desperate to feel better. In those moments, I wanted my husband to do something because I wanted someone else to fix me, and he happened to be nearby. Unfortunately, that's not actually possible. I'm the only one who can fix me, first of all. And once I've overdrawn myself like that, there's no fixing me for a while anyway. But that didn't stop me from getting angry and disappointed with him for not fixing me. Learning to fill my own happiness tank before it got low freed me of that feeling of desperation and neediness. When I stopped feeling needy and desperate, it improved my relationship greatly, allowing for more closeness and connection, which made me feel more loved. And feeling loved every day has been great for giving me confidence. Step number 7, pretend you are confident. Some of the things I'm suggesting probably feel highly unnatural. Maybe some of them don't even make sense to you. That's okay. Find your spirit of adventure and experiment with them anyway. In other words, you might feel anxious or afraid while you're becoming more confident. That's normal. Being confident doesn't mean you're never anxious or nervous. It just means that you trust that you're worthy of the airtime or the break or the good cut of meat or the compliment or the gift and the help that comes around. You may not feel that way yet. That's okay. You can still pretend that you do. Because here's a little secret about confidence. You ready? Pretending to be confident is how you become confident. As you keep playing the part of a confident woman, something magical happens. You become more dignified, calm, and attractive. You'll still be yourself, but you'll be the best version of you, the one who knows her worth and treats herself well. If you'd like to be my guest on the Empowered Wife podcast and share about how you fixed a struggling relationship using the 6 intimacy skills, I would love to interview you. Just go to lauradoyle.org/podcast-guest to let me know that you are willing to make a big contribution to ending world divorce by telling your relationship story. I look forward to meeting you. That's lauradoyle.org/podcast-guest. My guest, Mary, realized that she was controlling, but didn't know how to stop. She wanted attention from her husband, but instead, she found herself frequently texting another guy. She knew that wasn't what she really wanted, but the pull was so strong. Today, she finds the playfulness and connection with her husband so gratifying and fun. Her true vision for her marriage and her family is coming true. She's going to tell us exactly how she did that. Mary, welcome to the Empowered Wife podcast. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your story.
Thank you, Laura. I'm really happy to be here talking with you today. Thank you.
Great. Well, what was going on in the battle days?
Well, when I first got married, like I knew I had the right guy, like it was like that. Like the connection was really strong between us, and he really was just so like calm, and he put up with my controlling ways, like pretty well, I would say. Like there was a lot of especially around we're Muslim, and especially around like religion. I used to like tell him like you should be doing it this way. That there was a lot of that going on. I was part of this 101 class in our faith community, and I remember getting so mad at him because he didn't want to come, and like support me. Like that's how I viewed it. And I remember I was like walking to go teach that class, and I was on the phone with him, and I started like getting mad. I was like, "Oh, like I'd love for you to come and support me." Like I said it like in a nice way. That's how it started off, but it was in a manipulative "I would love," and and it was like, and then he was like, "That's not really my thing," and I was like, "Well, that means that you don't love me." Like I brought it to the next level, like immediately to try to manipulate him to come, and like, and then it just that sort of thing would happen a lot, and I would get upset that I felt like he wasn't supporting me in something
Mhm.
because he had other stuff he wanted to do. I thought, well, if we're married, we should be doing everything together. We should have common interests. That was a really big thing.
Mhm.
I read that a lot. Like, and if you don't have common interests, you're going to break apart. And I would, gosh, I mean, I remember going to like I think a lot of it stemmed now looking back. I know a lot of the control stemmed from fear. I remember when we were looking for our first apartment together, I was talking to my mom and him. We were in my mom's kitchen, and my mom said something about like finding the apartment, and I started to get nervous, like, are we going to end up on the street? Are we not going to have a place to live? And he was doing his hardest really to find us a place that would work, that was within our budget, that was close to work for him, that was in the, in Boston where we lived at the time, the prices there can be very high.
Mhm.
And I'm so embarrassed to admit, I like screamed at him in front of my mom and I was like, we better not live on the street. Like, oh my gosh, it's so embarrassing to like think about that scene right now, like to just be like, oh, like, and I think he smiled, which was always something that bothered me. Anytime I raged, he was kind of like, oh, like, I'm not sure what to do with that. That's not the Mary that I know and love. And he's just so laid back that was his response, but then, and so I thought like, I knew that was wrong, and yet I just didn't know how to change it, and
Mhm.
I knew that at some point it would be too much for him. I assumed because you're like, there's only so long that somebody can like be controlled, even a calm, laid back, chilled person like my husband. And so at like, after a year or so, after 2 years, I remember him saying things like that, like kind of be like, look, can't, he would very calmly be like, look, you can't tell me like like you have to let me do what I want to do. Right now I want to watch this movie. And it was like that with a lot of different things. I didn't like him watching too much TV. That was a big one for me. I even put a list of other things we should be doing and taped it to the bottom of the TV. Like, these are more productive things to do with your time than watch TV. Oh, it was bad, Laura. It was bad. And I ignored the list just as much as he did. I mean, it was
Right,
basically
right.
just like a guilty reminder of like all the things that I was supposed to be doing, that I wasn't. Instead, here I was watching this movie. And so then I felt like a hypocrite too, because I was like, I'm trying to control him so he's better, but I can't even follow my own rules. And so it just, which made me feel even worse, and so there was this running cycle of like Mary getting afraid about something, raging at her husband, and then needing to apologize and kind of reassessing and why did that happen? And then Mary being calm, and then Mary getting afraid and raging, and then, having to apologize. And it was just this cycle. And I was like, how the heck do I get out of this cycle? And I love spirituality and faith, and so I would often look towards that to try to find ways, kind of like the Gandhi, ideal of be the change you want to see in the world. And I was like, yeah, like I can be the change. And then I'd get home and I'd just be automatically mad at my husband, and I'm like, like I can't be the change, like I could be so peaceful, at school or at work and like chill, and then I would get home and I would be upset about something. The food wasn't right. He wasn't cooking what I wanted. Excuse me. He wasn't cooking what I wanted to make, or he'd make things that he loves, but not that I love. The man was making me dinner. And here I was thinking, but that's not what I would prefer. Oh my goodness. Like I had every excuse in the book, to think of ways that maybe he wasn't like up to snuff, but really in my heart, I knew that he was. Like I knew that he was a great guy. I knew that he was a good person. I knew all of those things, and yet I didn't know. I didn't have the skills
Yeah. No
to
one ever
stop.
taught you, right? No one.
Yeah.
My favorite thing so far is the list under the television of things that would be more productive. And why do I love that? Because I relate to that, and also to the fear that when I was raging, like you described, kind of screaming at him in front of your mom about the apartment, I knew like I'm not going to be able to have the love I want if I continue to act like this. Like in those moments, right? The terror was so big and so real. Like he's gonna, any logical, self preserving person is not going to want to be around me right now when I'm acting like this. And you had that same pain and fear and awareness of yourself when you were in those fits of rage, it sounds like. So it's super relatable. I think these are things we don't post on Facebook. Hey, last night I raged at my husband or whatever, right? Like these are the secret things that but I'm so delighted that you're sharing with us so authentically. So thank you for that. So I mean, was there a moment where you thought, gosh, we can't go on like this marriage
Oh,
is
gosh, like I knew, I think, because I spent a lot of time trying to work inwardly and really work on what some people might call the third eye, and work on um, being a self-reflective person, and doing like work through my faith in terms of like writing out what I did wrong, what could have been better, like how do I want to meet it the next time. I mean, I had an Excel spreadsheet, like I was always working on it, and I think that work made it so that when finally I found your book, I was
Mhm.
open to it. I was like, yes, like, I needed practical tips, because like mantras are awesome, right? Like, I love them, and yet if without like just kind of like a step by step, I was lost, and so I found the skills. We had our daughter, and she was about a year old when we decided to move from our apartment to a house that my husband had got. And really cool, like, new project, and this flip house. I don't know how before the skills I accepted that, but anyway, I did. I was like, this is a great house, like, like, thank God, because it is a great house. And so yeah, I remember we were moving, from our apartment, and a friend of I had a friend from my faith community, and her husband was going to help us move. Super nice of him, right, to offer. And I had spent the whole week packing everything, labeling boxes. Like I was super on top of it. I'm kind of like a pre-planner type person,
Mhm.
organized, right?
Sure.
Stay
Yeah.
organized. That way, nothing will go wrong. That's the farsity, at least the farce, I should call
Right.
it.
The illusion. Yeah. Yeah.
Illusion. Thank you. That's the word. And yeah, and so I was under this illusion all week that, like, we were going to be out and packed, so that Saturday night, we could just go to sleep, 10 o'clock, and then wake up the next morning, and go to our new place, and everything would be in the truck. And my husband had got the truck on Saturday and started filling it with boxes, and he started pretty, like, maybe around like 1 p.m., 2 p.m., filling the truck up with boxes with the help of my friend's husband. And so then it was like 9 o'clock, 9:30 at night, and I was getting anxious and upset that this wasn't done yet. This sounds really ridiculous right now, but it was really like now that like when I say it out loud, I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
God, like, oh my goodness. But and it's embarrassing as well. Uh,
Mhm.
and and so I went over to him and our daughter was sleeping. And I went over, well, and kind of while my friend's husband wasn't there, he was like, on the stairs going with other boxes. I was like, so why is it taking so long? I was like, you should be in bed by now. Like, are you coming to bed? And he's like, looking around the room, pointing at the boxes, like, we still have some work to do. And I was like, you should be done. Like, I was mad that he hadn't planned. Like, that was my
Mhm.
anger. I was mad that he wasn't organized enough, like he should have done this sooner. Nothing that he could fix, right? Like, I was mad at the past, the past day, or week or whatever. Um, and I got so frustrated with his response too, right? Because he didn't hand me a bouquet of roses when I said that, he
That's
was
weird.
he wasn't
Yeah.
like that, right? Like, oh honey, I love you so much for getting mad at me right now. No, he was like, look, just leave me alone so I can finish. And I was like, oh, the gall of the man to speak to me that way, right?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
as he was going downstairs with more boxes, I call him on the phone to continue my upsetness at him. And I think while he was like, he was at the door, he's like, look, I'm doing my best. I will finish soon and just go to sleep, you know? And he probably said that like in a testy way. My husband's friend overheard him. I'm sorry, my friend's husband overheard him.
Yeah.
And so finally I went to bed and I don't know, maybe we got over that somehow. I can't remember exactly how, but I must have gone to bed and kind of chilled out. And
Yeah, you probably woke up like, "Huh, yeah, but
yeah,
feeling
right.
better."
Like
Yeah, yeah.
everything's in the van. We're moving. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So a few days later, I was at the service of my faith communion, and my friend came over, whose husband had helped us, and she was like, "Oh, Mary, I just want to see how's everything going." I was like, "Oh, great,
Yeah.
great. We got into our new place, whatever." And she was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, I kind of, kind of like, you look behind your shoulder, you're like, me,
Yeah.
like, like, of course, yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, same old Mary. Uh, and she says, well, because my husband said that, like, your husband had yelled at you on the phone. And I was like, oh, I was like, no, I'm fine. I said, that was my fault. And I kind of took a
Mhm.
deep breath and I said, I've got a problem. And I pushed him too far. I said, and
Mm.
I said, I said, but we've gotten over it. I apologized and I think that we're okay now. And I knew like I knew I had this problem, and like it did take a little bit to tell her that, even though she was my friend. And so she said to me, she was like, oh, okay. And it kind of like, I think, she was like, okay, now she heard me, and she created a safe space for that moment for me. And she said, I really think you're a great wife and a great mom, and I have this book you might like. And at that
Mm.
time, it was 5 years ago, and so she gave me the title Surrendered Wife, led Laura Doyle. And when I went back to work that day, I didn't do any work. I just read the blog the entire afternoon. I was like, oh my gosh. I ordered the book within like an hour of like reading, I think maybe 20 minutes of reading an article on the blog. And I was like on your blog, and I was like, I have to get this book. And Amazon wasn't as fast back then. So I had to wait like 3 days. But I got it and I just devoured the book. I mean, like, I could not put it down. And thank God it came at that time too, because we're moving to this house that needed all of this work. And it really needed a lot of work. I mean, it smelled to high heaven of cat pee, like it was really a fixer upper. And there were lots of opportunities for control,
Yeah.
um, lots of opportunities for control and,
You're out of your comfort zone.
oh, big
Yeah.
time. And yet, because I had your book and I started like that evening, like implementing the skills, like with whatever you think. I love the financial intimacy thing because I was a big like budgeter. That was part of my organization control system. And I used to get mad at him for like going over budget at the grocery store. I can remember like buying stuff for like our daughter, and he was like, I think she'd like these. I was like, ooh, Fig Newtons. I think that's gonna be we're gonna
Too
be $5
pricey.
over. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, at least get the store brand, don't get the
Right.
actionable.
At least. Come
Yeah,
on.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he was just like, "Okay," but so anyway, thankfully, that's behind me. And he's so much more generous than I am too. So, not that there weren't our fair share of, like, red notices on the front door because the water was gonna get shut off in 5 days, but because I had the skills, I was like, "He'll take care of it. I trust him to take care of it. I've got a lot going on over here," like, I really started to
Yeah.
just focus on myself, and
Well,
ask
that's
myself.
big. That's big. You were trusting him to handle finances. You kind of stepped away from paying the bills
Yes.
and he was doing it. And there were no, gosh, your story's so much like mine, Mary. I love it. It's like, oh, someone, I think we might be twins separated at birth or
I
something
think so,
because
I think so.
I had the same stuff. So, but that didn't shake you to see the notices on the door.
No, and my friend, who had given me your book, given me the title, she had read the book as well, and so she had an example where her husband had not paid the cell phone bill, I think, in a while, and I remember she said, "Oh, my husband didn't pay the cell phone bill," and she said, and she was explaining to me how she'd used the skills to get over that fear. And when she said, "Oh, I hear you. That sounds hard to him," he responded, "Oh, like, thank you so much for saying that." Like, he was relieved that she wasn't also upset at him because he was upset with himself.
Yourself.
Yeah. And so I had that example in my head, and I really clung to that tightly, when I saw those notices. I was like, you know what? He's going to see that notice. He's going to be more upset with himself. I don't I don't need to be some sort of hateful reminder, of how disappointing his life is, or how
Yeah.
disappointed he is in himself, like, no, like, that's not necessary.
What a failure he is as an adult, a
Yeah,
responsible adult, or yeah.
exactly. Like, the man's gonna feel that, like, the city has already
Yeah.
left that at his feet. I do not need to be part of that particular committee, of
Right.
failure review.
Right.
I was like, I'm done being a member of that committee. I really wanted to be
Mm,
the fan club, the champion club, like, wow, bravo, and he was doing all these wonderful things with, like, a new work and new job, and fixing houses, and he doubted himself a lot during that. He was like,
sure.
I don't
Sure.
know if it's going to work, and I need people, it's going to take too long. I was like, and I was so happy to know that I didn't have to change those thoughts. He could have an opinion about something, and that was great. Like, he thinks that, I remember he wanted to buy a house that literally had a hole in the front because there had been a fire and there was a hole in the front of the building. And I was thinking to myself, I don't think you can buy a house with the hole in the front. Like, how are you going to fix the hole? Right. Like, I mean, and to me, it was like this. I mean, in my head, I had a lot of opinions about buying a house that had caught fire and had a large gaping hole in the front, but I looked at it and I was like, wow, I was like, this is going to be great, and he wanted me to see it too, which was really, he started to open up a lot more. He'd say, like,
Sweet.
he talked a lot more
Yeah.
about his childhood, and he wanted to include me in his projects, and say, like, what do you think of this? And how is this going? And because he knew that I was going to be his champion, and
Mm,
yeah, and he has such wonderful ideas all the time, and so I was really happy to be able to focus on that for him. And yeah, and he fixed up that hole. He fixed it all up by himself. He fixed all the electrical work inside of it, and it looked great. And he sold it at, like, a huge markup, and it was awesome. It was like,
oh.
yeah, it was
So
really cool.
your faith in him really translated into his faith in himself to be successful with that project, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And what happened with the water bill? Did it get shut off or
No, no,
oh, okay,
never
okay.
lost our water.
You never okay. So he was trustworthy. Wasn't ideal, but yeah,
Yes.
you found out that he could. Okay. Okay, so you're finding all this evidence that when you choose your faith, like your husband rose to the occasion and
Yeah.
and was the wonderful man you married.
Yeah.
So, but it can be hard to do that, right? In the moment. How are you finding the strength to do that in these scary situations? Like a
Mm,
house with a hole in it, no notice
yeah.
on your door.
I think the biggest thing has been having the stories of other women in my head, other women who, whether it was a terrible example, that they
Yeah.
had like, a terrible example, like your Hawaii example,
Yeah. Yeah.
who wants to look at volcanoes when we could be on the beach? I love,
Right.
that's a good
Shrieking. Yeah.
example. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Been there, done that, right?
Right. When I just
I-
raged at my husband for taking me to Hawaii and
right.
taking me to see a volcano. Yeah. 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 Horrible warning.
Yes, horrible warnings and the wonderful examples, like my friend who was like, supported her husband even though they were shutting off the cell phones. Um, and and so having those examples in my head was really big. And it came to a point where, so I was, working with the skills for years, and I would have like glitches where I really wanted to find a community, more, um, and so I decided to, have a call to see if I wanted to have coaching. This was several years ago, and that on that call, like, the coach really helped me with this issue with my mother-in-law. And she helped me focus on my vision of wanting to be like friendly with my mother-in-law and going on
Mm.
nice long walks with her. And I mean, it really helped me just in that 40-minute call. And yet at the time, I was like, I don't know if I can, and I don't know if I can do the coaching right now. And so I put it off. And then lots of changes happened in my life. So we had two more children together, two little boys, and my husband was like super supportive during the pregnancies and births, and just magical, such
Mm.
beautiful memories of that. And then but then we had a family come and live with us, and so that we could have help with childcare, and they were new to this country, so they needed support as well. So this great mutual agreement, but they're from another country, and I'm not as good at that language. They speak Arabic, and so I was like, it was really hard for me to be at home sometimes because my husband would be talking to them, and I wouldn't understand everything. And the other mother is like one of the best people in the world. I love her to death. But it was just hard to be in a group of people speaking another language that was really hard for me to understand. And I was really strengthened by it, but I mean, for like 6 months, my head hurt. Like, I'm not going to lie. Like, and that around that time, I also started a new position at work, which turned out to be a lot more emotionally draining than I expected.
Mm.
And very emotionally, took a big emotional toll on me to listen to other people's traumatic stories, um, and a lot of body trauma as well, which was very hard to hear. So
Mm.
that sadness was settling in. Plus, we had this new family that was living with us who were very helpful, but at the same time, it was just an added stress, to have to speak a different language with them. And then, um, and then my husband also got a new job that was nighttime. It was like it just piled on, Laura. Like, I was just like, oh man, like this is not, this is really tough, um, and it was hard because I found myself slipping with the skills. I really found myself
Mm.
slipping. And I found myself like getting upset, like about things at work at my husband, and trying to explain to him like why I was upset. And he just didn't really get it. Like, he wasn't there. And, he's never worked with trauma survivors. So it was hard to explain things to him. And I took that as maybe the old story, like, oh, you're not supporting me, you know? Um, and and I was like, you know what, I got to go back to the skills, And so I'd reread. I had the Empowered Wife at that point. I had the stories of surrendered wives. I had that book, and I would read the blog all the time. And so I called for coaching again, and this time I invested in myself. And I got the 6 months of coaching. And I was like, so every 2 weeks I had my call. Um, and I like, when I go back and listen to those recordings, I always cried during the first, like, several months. There was always something that brought me to tears, um, and gosh, it helped me so much because it was around that time as well that, I started, um, and learning another, I started learning another language, and I started reaching out to people who could help me learn that language, people really far away. And there was this one guy who was friendly, and so we started like exchanging messages. But I noticed pretty quickly that although we were being respectful and really only talking about learning languages, that it was getting to be too much and it was almost like crossing a line, and I noticed it pretty quickly. I would say within like a few weeks, and I was like, there are other ways to learn this language. And my coach helped me see that. And but because my husband had this new job and he was part of the problem was is that he was working at nighttime. And so I felt really lonely, so I was in a house where I didn't understand everybody, especially the other mother. She really loves me, it was just hard. I couldn't understand her love all the time. And I felt very lonely from work because of the emotional stories that I had to listen to. And I didn't have a great way of, of dealing with, those stories I was listening to. And so it was kind of like this great little outlet, it was like, oh, like I'll just message this friend, and now I don't have to think about all this other stuff for a while, you know, because it was a lot easier
Yes.
to, it was a lot easier for me to escape than it was to deal with the loneliness, um, and
Loneliness is real.
yeah, yeah, it really was. And I, I think back and I'm like, gosh, it's really like, and I remember telling my coach about this too. I was like, if I didn't love my husband so much, it wouldn't be so darn hard, that, like the skills for 3 years had just taught me to love him so much,
Mm.
that he's just such a wonderful person and he's such a wonderful father. And so I was like, this wouldn't be so darn hard, if I didn't like him so much, if I didn't like being around him. And that neediness did not translate well for him. So he responded well, like, he would give me hugs and say like, I'm here and things like that. um but he'd still like watch a movie instead of coming upstairs with me. He'd still, because he needed, whatever time he needed for himself, or
Yeah.
and it was a new job, so he was having stress in that as well. And so there was just a lot of things coming to head.
Yeah.
So, with the help of my coach, and really focusing on respect, I stopped all communication with the people from that group, and anyone I was talking to there. And that was really hard because it's not like my husband suddenly stopped working nights. It's not like that family suddenly moved out, you know, and
Still felt that loneliness. You're
yeah,
still in
yeah,
acute pain.
I did. And
Yeah.
one thing I started to do is I focused a lot on gratitude. That was something so I'd text my husband even when he's at work, and say, I learned that uh, it was okay. Just because I texted him first doesn't mean that I'm not attractive, doesn't mean that he
That's
doesn't
right.
care about me,
Or yeah.
In fact, and he would always respond, even on a busy night. He would respond, and
Mm.
with a heart or a message, and I realized as my coaching started to come to an end, I realized life is going to bring changes. There are going to be things that happen. It's not going to it's not like, oh, now that we've, reached a certain place, now I can finally just be, cool, new, chill Mary, and nothing's ever going to change again. Nobody's going to get a new job. Nothing, nobody's going to ever, have problems at school. No, like
Right. Or
things
get sick
are,
or yeah.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, things are going to happen. And I was like, that won't be the only time that a challenge is going to come up. And so I was like, I want to be in these skills forever. Like I want to have a community for the rest of my life, and and I remember my coach saying, "You would make a great coach." She's like, "Oh, like I love the way you explain that and your accountability." And I was like, "Oh, a great coach." And around the same time, a few women came to me asking for advice because I'm a lawyer. They're asking for advice about divorce on how to protect themselves. And I was kind of like, they didn't want to get divorced, but they were afraid that their husbands were thinking about divorce from them, which is so scary. And I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, well, here's a divorce lawyer, but I was like, I don't know if you need, if you put up, I was thinking to myself, if you put up that shield and you start to defend yourself from your husband, it doesn't lead to the intimacy and connection that you really want. And so I was like, maybe you want this book too, I'll give you this book too. I felt like, I was like, I know this isn't the advice you came here for, but here's the empowered wife. And I'm not like, I always have an extra copy. So I would always like hand it out to people. And so I was kind of like, oh, I'm kind of already doing this already. I'd love to really know how to coach women, and really know how to be there and how to listen. And so when I started the coaching last summer, this past summer, gosh, it just it really brought the skills to a whole new level, not just with my husband, but with my mother. That was a
Mm.
really big transformation there. Um,
What happened?
and well, I used to have this habit of the kind of in the battle days with my mom, the habit of criticizing my mom. I think there was a lot of even just in my head, even if it didn't come out, I really thought that she just didn't do things right. I think it's probably like, I looked at her and I was kind of like, oh, like, you shouldn't be controlling about that. Or not. I had a big shield up, I really felt like I had to defend myself a lot from her because I was afraid of what she would say. I remember my husband brought home all of this like furniture once from like a house that he was working on selling, and it was kind of like old furniture, some of it a little bit grungy, and but I really, this one piece I really liked. It was this wooden couch, and I put it right in the living room. And when my mom came over, she was like, "Oh, like what's that?" I was like, "Oh, it's this new piece of furniture that my husband got." And she was kind of like, she made some backhanded comment about it, like it wasn't overtly mean, but it wasn't nice. It was something like, like a, oh, he's collecting furniture, okay, something like that, like very kind of underhanded, what do they call those, like criticism,
Oh, like a
and
dig. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I said, you can't talk that way about my husband, you know and she was like, oh, okay. And in looking back, I feel like I'm not sure I could have handled it any other way. Um, I would now, with the coaching skills, I look back and I'm kind of like, there might have been maybe a more validating way to go about that, because I mean, at the time I was thinking, I really want to, I want to support my husband so much, even, if it means, uh, digging, like being angry at someone else, because they're not supporting him.
Mm.
I felt like I had to defend my husband from my mother. Um, and that was a really hard position to be in, because it's not fun to be in the middle. Right. And by the way,
Right.
my mother loves my husband too. So like, I don't, it would just come out sometimes, just the way she would say things. But take that. So that's kind of like what I would used to do compared to now. I remember I was sitting this summer with my dad and my mom outside, and I really turned to vulnerability now instead. Instead of defending myself from my mom, I actually put down the shield when something like that comes up. We were outside and she said something about my dad that was really hurtful, about my father, and it was so hurtful about my father that it hurt me. Like, and it was another dig. It was just like, well, he can't do that, and it was just hurtful to his pride, and just him as a man as well. And I felt that pain acutely.
Mm.
And in that moment, instead of jumping up and ripping out the shield and the sword and saying, you can't say that about my father, I put them aside and I said, ouch. And that was that took more courage than the shield and the sword. It really did.
So much more
Yeah, it really did.
vulnerable. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did she respond to that? Ouch.
There was kind of a small pause, but the conversation quickly changed to something else. Nobody said anything about it.
Okay.
And I find that I that's so much better than having having some argument,
Oh,
or having her defend herself from
right.
what I say, right, and saying worse things, or more things, and so in some ways it was really like a merciful to change the topic because
Yeah.
it took it away from, you know, and maybe that was kind of her way of apologizing too. I look back at that and I say maybe that was kind of her way of saying, recognizing that it wasn't a kind thing to say, and so
Yeah.
she was like, "Okay, I'm going to change the subject." Yeah.
She didn't want to continue in that direction. How did it feel for you to say that ouch? Like, what was your, how did you, yeah, how'd you
Yeah.
feel?
Oh, I felt, I've spent a lot of time defending my dad from my mom, and it felt like, oh yeah, that's not my job. You know, I felt like, yeah, I'm not my dad's defense lawyer.
Mm-mm.
That I don't
Mm.
have to be. And in fact, I want to love both of these people as much as I possibly can. That I need a big heart for that. I need a lot of openness for that. And
Mm.
that it was vulnerability like that led me this summer to be able to really listen to my mom when she was having trouble with her siblings, and to really listen. She was just having a hard time, and gosh, I would just listen. Like I just had an open an ear and say, wow, I hear you in that sound, and really acknowledging with empathy how
Mm.
she feels. Like, wow, I hear that really hurts you. And instead of giving advice, I used to dole out the advice a lot to my mom, and be like, well, maybe you should say this instead to your siblings, or maybe you should do this instead with your dad. And it never got me anywhere, and she would just get defensive. And it didn't build any connection with her. But this summer, I remember she was talking, and we were outside, and she was talking to me about some things that were troubling her, and I really just listened for a good hour. She was talking, and I really acknowledged with empathy all of her pain, and maybe gave a few examples myself, kind of about like, oh yeah, like I think I gave an example with "I hear you" with my husband, when he disagreed with me on something, and I used "I hear you," and she was like, yeah, and I asked her like, "What's your vision?" And
Oh, I love it.
yeah,
Now you're a
yeah.
coach wherever you go. Every
I
conversation.
can't get it. Yeah, I can't stop. Like it's like I can't
Yeah.
stop. And yeah, and at the end of that visit, she said, "Thank you so much for talking with me today." Yeah, yeah. Oh, and there were so many times in that conversation with her where I had a better, quote unquote, better idea, right? There were a lot of better ideas in my head. I was like, oh, you
Oh,
should do it this way, you should do it that way, you should try this, you should try that. I actually gave her the book too this summer. Things will get as good as you can stand. Yeah, because it resonated with me a lot, in terms of outside of my marital relationship. That book really
yeah.
helped me kind of expand the skills, and so that's where I gave that to her, just to flip her whether she wants. But it wasn't. I didn't do it with any manipulation or pressure. It really
Yeah.
was just, hey, this might interest you, and that's a big change for me. Another huge change that came about in terms of the control with my husband, was around religion and faith, and really just letting him be and have the relationship with God that he wants. I stopped. I even started a few SFPs, like because he's
About fulfilling
really,
prophecies. Yeah.
yes, thank you, spouse fulfilling prophecies. That he's such a great. Is really good at reciting scripture, and like that's not something I'm as good at. And so anytime he would like say, I would say something, and he would be like, oh, that's like X, Y, or Z from scripture. And I was like, and I would always like really jump on that and be like, you are so knowledgeable, and you're such a great example of a Muslim. And he would always be kind of like, no, 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 but the other day we were one thing that used to bother me is that we didn't pray together enough. I thought this was like something that we were supposed to do as a couple early on. That was something that bothered me. And I used to say, like, oh, I'd like to pray with you. Or, well, I used to say it a little bit more in a cutting way, like, isn't it time that we should pray? Like,
We
yeah,
should pray now. Yeah. You're right.
exactly. We pray now. Yeah, exactly. That's what we're supposed to be doing. That's what you are supposed to be doing with me. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of that. And, and so this was just the other day, Laura, and I thought, wow, I could really feel the transformation within me. He was praying, and I just kind of scooted in and started praying too. And then, but we weren't actually praying together. And at one point he finished, and I was still praying, and he could hear me. He could hear my words. And, it was like the world stopped for a minute, Laura. Like there was such a deep connection.
Mhm.
And it was interesting because we weren't even praying together, and yet we were in the same space and connected to God together in different ways, in a different stance. We weren't doing exactly the same thing. But we were there, together. And that moment lasted for several minutes, and it was so connective, so intimate. And afterwards, he was when we were done, I was about to leave the room. He was about to leave the room, and I kind of grabbed his arm, and I was like, I just wanted to say, like, thank you so much for praying with me, and I loved that. And he gave me a hug, and it was really magical, you
Wow.
know. I'll always remember that moment. Yeah.
So you got to use gratitude for him praying with you instead of like the nagging or we should, the control. And you created that beautiful, intimate moment. And also, I guess you could even say kind of followed his lead, right? There
Yeah.
was like a spiritual lead in a way. When
Yeah.
you're praying, you're like, okay, this must be time to pray.
Yeah.
So, and what is your relationship like now? That gives me a little bit of a glimpse for sure. But how would you describe it now?
Oh gosh, I remember really wanting to get back to playfulness with my husband. That was a big thing that I felt like was missing, and uh, and kind of like thinking back to I remember like this woman early on in our marriage. She said, "You guys are so much fun." Like she saw us like interacting, in like the first few months we were married, and she was like, "You guys are so much fun," and that kind of got, I don't know, like it kind of went down, after a few years, and I wasn't as much fun anymore, and I thought it was just because like that's what happens in life. I was super fun actually at work and with other people. I was just not as much fun at home. I was still fun. It was still there, but yeah, and I was just kind of like, and so when I got the skills, I remember he was painting in the kitchen, and the and I knew that they were working because I really I let the playfulness come back. He was painting this cupboard, and I came in and I said something like, I was dressed in painting clothes too, and I was like going to go paint something. I think the porch or something needed to be done, and I was excited about doing that. And he said something about like, oh, maybe we should do it this way or that way, and I was like, whatever you say, you're the king of the house, and I like smiled, and then I pretended to like grovel on the ground. And he was like, his face just lit up like oh my gosh, he was just like, what happened? Who is this person? But he was so happy that like playful Mary was back, that fun Mary was back, that it wasn't all about, you know, the organization and getting things done and exhaustion. It was about like, yeah, like you're the man of the house. You go for it. Like, best. I love that, and then I could just like go out and do whatever the heck I wanted and paint and have fun and, be outside.
Love that.
And the place
Yeah.
was really returned. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes he starts playing with the kids, and he like, is throwing them up in the air and, tossing them around, and in ways that I'm not as agile and I'm not able to do as well as he does, and he's so good at it. And I just watch and smile, and I tell you, so many times when he's playing with the kids, he'll look over and our eyes will meet for a minute, and I'll be smiling, and he smiles back, and it's almost like, Laura, he looks over like I think he looks over now on purpose because he likes that what
The
I'm doing
wife mirror
to
that he
him.
sees. Yeah,
Yes,
what's
yes.
reflected to
Yeah,
him.
and
Yeah.
so I think, 10, 12 times we'll be playing with the kids. I'll look over, just kind of a knowing smile, and I'll smile and wink back. And I just like watching them, and being able to see that fun that he brings too. And so even when I'm just the spectator, I'm a lot more fun,
Yeah, yeah. And those are, I mean, those little moments, that's what intimacy is made of, right? Little connections, just eye contact while he's tossing the kids in the air or playing with them, whatever. Or like this kind of this fun, silly moment you had painting the porch. Like that's where the intimacy happens, right? It's all these little moments combined. So, what would you say to a woman who's in your shoes that you used to be in, where you're saying, why didn't you plan this better, this move? And maybe having these moments of rage that she can't stop, but wanting to create what you have now where there's so much lightness and playfulness in her house. What's your tip for her? Where should she start?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is it's in you to be that woman you want to be. She's there, and she probably comes out all the time, and and to let her come out best, I think I would say, check out the blog, check out the Empowered Wife, get on the Facebook group, whatever jive you want, whatever style of participation with the skills, and really just experiment, take what works and try it out. Fake it till you make it. I faked it till I made it yesterday. My husband said some things, I didn't take the bait, and the whole day I was like punching the air in anger. I was like, oh, I can't
Yeah,
believe.
right.
But I was like, and then by the end of the night he gave me a big hug and said sorry for what he had said, and I was so grateful that I hadn't gotten mad at him directly, that I had kind of just gotten busy with self care instead. And yeah, fake it till you make it is okay. You're probably not going to have to fake it for too long because something's going to happen where you're going to be like, oh, okay, this is great. Great. I got my hug, or I got my I'm sorry, or
Yeah,
I
but no
got
marriage is perfect, right? Your
exactly.
husband's still getting bad moods, or
Mhm.
right, things still go wrong. Where sometimes you're still moving at 9 o'clock at night, or whatever, right? Things can happen. So I love. And what would you say to Mary if you could go back in time and tell her what you know now that you didn't know then?
I would say you're on the right path. You know, like that's not, it's not who you really want to be. That's not the real Mary. Where she is. And yeah, I would have given her the book a few years earlier. That would have been sure. Why not? As soon as possible, right? And although I also say, and I love that question too, Laura. What would you tell yourself? Um, and and at the same time, and I hear this reflected in a lot of women. It's like I wouldn't change my journey for anything, right? Like my and this is especially true, when I had that deep loneliness. I wouldn't change my all those shards of colored glass that came out of that created this beautiful stained glass window that turned out to be one of my favorite windows. And I so I don't know if I would trade it. And yet at the same time, if I could have gotten it a few years earlier, yeah, there's a few embarrassing things I wouldn't have minded to have avoided. There's some embarrassment I wouldn't have minded to have avoided. Yeah, yeah. So
Well, embarrassing stories are just my absolute favorite. Whenever someone says this is embarrassing, I'm leaning in, like, oh yeah, let's hear.
yeah, like,
It's very connecting to hear the embarrassing stories, and you were so great about sharing your embarrassing stories. And somebody once, one of my coaches shared with me that her husband had said, "You can choose to grow, or you can choose yourself, your image, but you have to choose. It's one or the other." And so I see how committed you are to growing and just being authentic. And it's just delightful. It's really endearing. And of course, your story is wonderful. So, Mary, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us what's possible, even though you didn't know how or what was going to happen. But you made your family wonderful. So it's definitely possible. And you're a great role model for what's possible. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for sharing your stories with the world. Yeah, it meant so much to me many years ago, and every day it still does. Every day. Thank you so much.
Love it. It feels like we have the same story.
It does. I've never been to Hawaii though, so
Okay, well, now you know what to do if you ever go. Just get
I,
mad about the volcano. All right. Thanks so much.
thank you, Laura.
If you'd like to be my guest on the Empowered Wife podcast and share about how you fixed a struggling relationship using the 6 intimacy skills, I would love to interview you. Just go to lauradoyle.org/podcast-guest to let me know that you are willing to make a big contribution to ending world divorce by telling your relationship story. I look forward to meeting you. That's lauradoyle.org/podcast-guest. It's time for the Worst Relationship Advice of the Week award.
It's the worst relationship advice of the worst relationship advice. Yeah, it's the worst relationship advice of the worst relationship advice of the week.
And the advice that I find most frustrating this week was sent to me by a longtime student who generously contributed this article she saw on a well-known medical website about a preliminary study that theorizes that self-silencing is potentially deadly for women. Self-silencing is defined in the article as appearing outwardly agreeable, while inner feelings grow angry and resentful but are rarely expressed. And according to this preliminary study, they found a higher correlation but did not find causation between women who self-silence and those at risk of having a stroke. So first of all, I want to give a big shout out to you for sending this in. Thank you so much. You know who you are, and I know who you are, but I'm not saying your name because I like to protect everybody's privacy on our campus. But I so appreciate you sending me this terrible advice. And to summarize, the subtext of this article about this non-peer reviewed study is that if you feel resentful toward your husband, you should tell him so, right? Otherwise, it could cost you your life. You could have a stroke if you're not forthcoming with your complaints and criticism and anger. That's the appalling message of this poorly reasoned out article. And I remember believing this early on too, that the right way, and really the only way to communicate in marriage, was to say unpleasant things if I felt them about my husband. And that the only alternative to being truthful would be to become a doormat, which meant I would be taken advantage of and mistreated. But in my case, I was resentful and angry and upset a lot. And so I expressed that, and that led to me feeling mistreated. But looking back, that was my own doing. I mistreated myself and also showed up with so much hostility and defensiveness and fear that there wasn't much room for my husband to be my hero, even if he somehow still wanted to be, after I told him how resentful I was that he wasn't contributing enough or cleaning up enough or making love to me enough. And I don't think I'm the only one who thought this way. I'm not the only one who thought that the choices were to either be critical and downright mean at times, or else to be a repressed victim who might have a stroke. Like there's option A or B, and that's it. But I've since discovered that there's a very high price to pay when I berate my husband under the guise of being truthful or honest about how resentful I'm feeling, even if that's how I'm feeling. It's pretty rare now that I feel resentful toward him. But when I do, I'm not inclined to share those negative feelings with him, as this study suggests I should do, maybe if I don't want to have a stroke. That's because I know that resentment is typically all about me, not him. It's rooted in me saying yes when what I really meant to say was, I can't. It's because I piled on too much work when I could have asked for help. It's because I decided to focus on what I didn't have instead of all the amazing things I do have. It's because I got scared and let my doubt run away with me instead of deciding to choose my faith. As a mere mortal woman, of course, I still have those very human feelings of resentment or anger at my husband bubble up. So when I do, it's a pretty good bet that I'm low on reserves. So then job number one is to fill myself up by connecting with a friend or napping or watching a comedy. Now, after I'm rejuvenated, I can see if my husband is really a jerk or if maybe I was just out of sorts. If I'm still hurt and upset at him, my next stop would be to talk to someone who could reflect back to me whatever's in my blind spot, somebody like a coach. Am I trying to control, or do I have an expectation? Am I nurturing a superiority complex? Well, sometimes I'm guilty of those things. So until I figure that out, I'd rather not point fingers at my husband, because hurling nasty words about how resentful I am will only serve to add a marriage problem on top of my original problem. Because I'm in charge of those fears, expectations, and my recurring superiority complex, not him. My husband can't fix any of that for me. And if I take him out at the knees, I'm going to handicap the one guy who wants to help me solve my problems more than anybody else in the world. If instead I approach the topic with accountability for those unpleasant traits of mine, he can offer me comfort and support. Like if I say, boy, I am cranky today. Or if I say, I'm having free floating terror about remodeling the house. Well, then he can offer me a hug or a cup of tea or try to make me laugh. So if I'm filled up with happiness and I've scanned my side of the street to make sure I'm not wearing the victim perspectacles that I used to wear every day, there is very rarely anything left to get off my chest. I learned how to make myself feel better, which feels like a superpower compared to how I used to suffer when I was filled with resentment. I'm grateful for the ability to self-reflect before I explode. I didn't always have that, and it seems like one of the best skills I ever cultivated. That's all it is, a skill. I mean, anyone can learn it, like baking bread or playing guitar or braiding hair. For that reason, the advice that self-silencing is potentially deadly for women is the worst advice I've heard all week. Listen and subscribe to the Empowered Wife podcast. Next week, we'll talk about the link between finding your purpose and fixing your relationship. In the meantime, I hope you're having lots of fun. Today's fun fact is that I consider the time that my GPS says I will arrive as the time to beat.